I recently picked up the new M5 MacBook Pro, and as a bit of a gamer, the first thing I could think of to push the limits of this machine is to try and game on it, and I was very pleasantly surprised about the results. Let's talk about it. Having loaded up the PC version of Steam with Crossover, it was time to find the most hardware-intensive games that I own, and I frankly don't own that many new games, since I usually pick them up on the PS5. But I have Wreckfest 2, which is still in early access and is therefore unoptimized, and involves a lot of destruction and 24 high-quality vehicles on screen at once. I'll be comparing the results with my old M1 MacBook Air and my 2022 Zephyrus G14, which you can see my review of in the card above. I'm also recording everything with a camera, 2012 YouTube Let's Play style, in order to not waste any performance on capturing with OBS, although in hindsight I probably should have used a capture card. Regardless, both games are set to the same quality settings as you can see here. The Zephyrus and MacBooks have a 16:10 display, which helps with trying to get the resolution as close as possible. However, due to the Mac's weird approach to Retina display scaling, I couldn't go any larger than 1200p. The lowest frame rate on the Zephyrus was in the low 70s, and the average frame rate tended to be in the 90s and 100s. On the M5 MacBook, 27 at the lowest, and mid-30s to low 50s average, depending on what was happening on the screen. That might not necessarily sound too impressive, but keep in mind that we are losing some performance by translating both x86 calls to ARM and DirectX 12 API to Metal, and the fan was barely spinning, and you can play the game while unplugged from the wall with no frame loss. While on the Zephyrus, I wouldn't even make it an hour on battery while using the dedicated GPU when gaming. If you're wondering how the MacBook Air fared, well, it didn't. I didn't have enough RAM and macOS froze the game. Next up is BeamNG Drive, a game that pushes both the CPU with its physics calculations and AI drivers, and GPU with its graphics, at once again the same settings. With the Zephyrus, I got between the high 60s and mid 70s in the city, and hitting just about 100 frames per second on the highway on the San Francisco map. Considering how much less performance we get in Wreckfest on the Mac, you'd expect maybe 20 in the city and 50 on the highway, right? Well, you'd be completely wrong. 60 to 70 frames in the city, and in the 80s and 90s on the highway. Seriously, there's no smoke and mirrors here. The graphics settings are identical, unless I buggered something up. Now, AI drivers are where the frame rate tanks on both devices. On the Zephyrus, we went down to the low 50s in the city, and in the highway it fluctuated between the low 60s and high 70s. On the M5, wild fluctuations, about 25 to 30 FPS in the city, and 25 to 43 FPS on the highway. On the M1, I had to lower some settings down to not overload the swap, and the resolution is down to 900p, due to the scaling joys of macOS. And with a frame rate as low as 22 FPS at times, yeah, it's unplayable. Now keep in mind that frame rate is one thing, but frame times are another. You will have noticed in the M5 BeamNG gameplay how there are hitches, and how the game seems to go into slow motion for a split second. This is arguably more annoying than a low frame rate, as it pulls you out of the game. These slow motion stutters are especially noticeable when emulating the Xbox 360. The M5 is more than capable of emulating the 360, however, there are these little stutters now and again that are rather annoying. Even when uncapping PGR4 from its 30 FPS lock, the game is buttery smooth, especially with the ProMotion display. However, these slow motion stops and starts to the gameplay are rather annoying, and I don't think it has anything to do with shader compilation, since I played the same track numerous times. Keep in mind that Xenia is a funny beast, where one update can break a game that was previously working. Since a separate fork of Xenia needs to be compiled that removes special checks intended for x86 computers, it means that the build I am running here is over a month out of date, and we can see some graphical glitches in PGR4. Again, it's a game that keeps swapping from being broken to fixed, to broken again. The M1 MacBook Air's performance was unplayable however, and it did even worse than my old Asus VivoBook with its Radeon GPU built into the Ryzen CPU. So, what have we learned all in all? The M5 MacBook Pro isn't a gaming beast by any stretch. However, in the short few years between the original M1 and now, Apple has really pushed a boundary that they've never pushed before. This is the first time a base model spec MacBook can run modern, intensive games at a playable frame rate in decent quality. You can finally game on a MacBook. Not necessarily well for £1,600 or dollars compared to the competition, since for that price you could get a laptop with a 5070 mobile. But this is still a leap in Apple computing. It also helps that this is just overall a stupidly solid laptop. I won't do a full review on it since every YouTuber under the sun has reviewed this laptop, and I know that videos about modern Apple devices get no views on this channel, but seriously. Thanks to the beefy silicon and optimized software from both Apple and Adobe, no matter what files I throw at this laptop, it will happily edit on Final Cut and Premiere alike. Plus the display is amazing, and the 1000 nit brightness has to be unprecedented on a laptop. The display is 200 pixels off from 4K, so it is extremely sharp, even compared to the 1600p of my Zephyrus and work ZenBook. HDR works seamlessly on macOS versus Windows, where you have to enable HDR in the settings and then disable it, as otherwise HDR to SDR tone mapping makes colors look weird. Plus, Mac's animations look amazing on the 120Hz display. I don't think I need to make any comparisons to Windows here. The mini LED display is quite similar to my mini LED TV. You will see blooming on even large blocks of white text against a black background. And if you look closely, you can see it around your cursor, but I'm used to this now, and ultimately prefer mini LEDs for their longevity, even if OLEDs are practically unburnable as of only a few years ago. The speakers are also the best I've ever heard on a laptop, seriously. The ZenBook and Zephyrus were pretty comparable to the M1 Air, but the Pro sounds like an expensive Bluetooth speaker, with a shocking amount of deep, thumpy bass. Although this bass is at the expense of vocal clarity, which makes editing videos on the speakers a tad annoying, as it makes it harder to understand what someone is saying. The battery life also lasts seemingly forever. At one point I started editing my recent video, and I didn't realize that my charger wasn't connected to the wall socket until about an hour in, when I noticed that the battery icon moved one bar. The only thing I'm not happy about is the lack of a charger in the box. This is an EU regulation, Apple. The UK is not in the EU, so why do you punish us? So yeah, that's my thoughts on the M5 MacBook Pro. While this has been my most expensive single purchase ever, to the point my credit card got locked and I had to call the fraud team, I don't feel like I've been ripped off in any way. The only compromise is the gaming performance. With how little power the M5 chip uses, it is arguably more of a gaming laptop than my actual gaming laptop, that has now been permanently plugged into my TV since I can't do any portable gaming, more like gaming at point A and then gaming at point B, both of these points requiring a power outlet. Let me know if there's anything else that you'd like to see about this laptop, such as the differences in rendering and timeline editing between the Mac and the Asus, and I'll make a follow-up video if there's any interest. Thanks for watching.